Hey everybody, welcome to this week's lecture. In this week we're going to be talking about AI, and we're going to learn some of this stuff here, maybe a lot of this stuff. We're going to talk about how do we define AI, and so there's some terminology which you're going to learn. You're going to learn this terminology right here, and I'm just making sure I'm recording, looking good, there it is. And then we're also going to learn about making AI, so you're going to learn about this terminology right here. We're going to learn about the Turing test, and then I'm going to show you a couple of AI things. And then next week, I think next week, what we'll do is we'll cover search versus AI and how AI could be confidently wrong, and then also AI and privacy. So we'll see how far we get, and maybe we'll do all that right now, or maybe we'll do some of this next week. But to start out right here, let's talk about defining AI. And so there's some terms which you should be aware of just so that you're conversant with AI. My family's home, so if you hear some noise in the background, that's what's going on. Yeah, we're definitely picking that up. So I'm just watching these bars here to see how much of the noise we're picking up. I could dial this down and it'll get a little bit more of me maybe and a little bit less of them. That's a little bit better. All right, so when people talk about artificial intelligence is this overarching category, and this category has all these other concepts within it. So if it's like, when you think about the ontology of ideas, and so ontology, and the word I'm saying there is ontology defined. And so ontology has two definitions. It's the branch of metaphysics, which deals with the nature of being. And it's one of my favorite words. I think we probably already talked about it at some point in the semester. But ontology is also a set of concepts and categories in a subject area or domain that shows their properties and the relations between them. So the ontological structure, one of the ways we really learn things is that we kind of think about like large concepts and then break them into smaller concepts. And if you think about like vehicles as an example, so the word vehicles is this overarching large concept. And then inside that larger concept, there are sub-concepts. So we could take vehicles and we could break them down into, hi.
Are you filming a video?
I am filming a video. What you doing? You need me to pause it? Hang on 1 second. He who travels alone travels fastest, but also he or she who travels alone travels alone. So there's trade-offs, aren't there? And being chill, the fine art of being chill, is an important art to integrate into one's own life and just to be relaxed about things and to release control and to let things unfold as they unfold and to not need things to be perfect. Those are all really wonderful skills to cultivate. Just as a little side note, almost like a mantra, I like this song here. I release control. And it's this song, I Release Control, right here by Alexa Sunshine Rose. You might check that out. So these overarching concepts, these ontological structures, the vehicles is this large overarching concept and can be broken down into like trucks and cars. And then trucks and cars are overarching concepts, larger concepts, and they can be broken down into like trucks can be broken down into pickup trucks, flatbed trucks, semi trucks, right? Like all these different trucks. And vehicles can be broken down into sedans, sports cars, coupes, convertibles like SUVs, and then each of those categories can be broken down into subcategories: luxury, economy, right? Or into the different brands. And so there's different ways to create different ontological structures for the same concepts. But this idea of taking a large concept and breaking it down into smaller concepts is a really common idea, and that's one of the ways the human mind works. And that's also one of the ways we learn is just take big concepts and break them down into smaller concepts. And you'll also notice that what I'm doing here is I'm creating a similarity between something we know and something we don't know, and creating these similarities or these knowledge bridges allows us to extend our knowledge. So we take something we already know and we compare something new to it, and in doing that allows us to more easily assimilate the new material. And so, I compared vehicles here, this large overarching concept. I compared that to artificial intelligence, which is also a large overarching concept. But this helped you understand this idea of large overarching concepts and then subconcepts within it. And that's the ontological structure of ideas. Really encourage you to look up ontology and own that as one of the words which you have in your vocabulary. And then also look up metaphysics. And metaphysics might seem a little bit intimidating, but metaphysics is actually a really beautiful thing. It's focusing on the first principles of things, right? And in particular, it focuses on the first principles of like being, knowing, substance, cause, identity, time, and space. So being, knowing, like what's it mean to be? What's it mean to know something, right? What is substance, material? Cause, right? Like what makes things happen? Is it a cause and effect environment? Identity, who am I? That's a huge one. Very big, one of the greatest questions of all, who am I? Time and space, right? So metaphysics is like, how do we really understand things at a really fundamental first principles level? First principles just means like the very basic. And so we could go to ChatGPT actually, and we could say, and we could copy this, and we could say, let's go back to metaphysics. We could copy this, metaphysics, noise. It's all right, right? Like it's totally okay. And we could say, what does first principles mean? Here it is being used in the definition I just looked up. All right, there we go. And first principles refers to the most basic and foundational concepts, assumptions, or truths that cannot be deduced from anything else. These are the building blocks upon which everything else is based. In the context of metaphysics, first principles are the fundamental ideas about existence, reality, and the nature of things that underlie all other inquiries or theories. So between like metaphysics and ontology, these are really like philosophies about knowing, right? And it's knowing because we're organizing things in an ontological structure. How are the ideas and concepts related to each other? Or it's knowing because we're looking at the fundamental first principles, the underlying concepts of like from which all other knowledge is built up. So really cool ideas there. And so AI is this overarching larger concept, and then inside that overarching larger concept, we could break that down into narrow versus general AI. And so narrow AI is exactly what it sounds like. Sometimes you'll hear people refer to narrow AI, and you could start to use that as a vocabulary word, which you now own, right? Like you now own this word, narrow AI. I'm just going to make sure I hit record again. That would be a bummer. And so narrow AI would be like AI that focuses on doing a single task. So like if you have a language AI that deals with just kind of understanding language and responding in language, that's very narrow. Because when you think about artificial intelligence is intelligence which is artificial. And so what is it that is real? What is it that's real intelligence? What's real intelligence? And so real intelligence is human intelligence or animal intelligence or any biological intelligence. And we want to emulate and mimic that. And so to create AI, just taking a step back here, to create AI, artificial intelligence, you have to understand real intelligence. And so the first step in creating AI or in understanding AI is to understand just regular I. The first step in understanding artificial intelligence is to understand intelligence. And so what is it that makes us intelligent as humans? Just one second. All right, I'm back. So AI, to understand artificial intelligence, you have to understand real intelligence. And so what makes us intelligent? And so that's a really metaphysical question, right? Like we're really here dealing with the nature of thought. Like what is the nature of thought? What is the nature of being? This is metaphysics. This is trying to understand intelligence at the fundamental first principles, at the fundamental levels. Like what is intelligence? And what is consciousness? And what does it mean to be alive and to know? And to be able to make decisions, and why do we make the decisions we make? Like these are really profound questions. And what makes us who we are, and how does that work? Is it simply biologic, right? Is it biological? Like is it just electrical impulses firing in our neural pathways in our brain? And so emulate intelligence, to create artificial intelligence, we have to understand real intelligence, natural intelligence, biological intelligence. And so at a fundamental level, when you start to understand biological intelligence, you're looking at, like, what is it that we do? We have our five senses. We could see, we could smell, we could taste, we could hear. That's four. And we have sensations. We have touch. Those are our five senses. And if you lost some of those senses, you're going to realize that you've lost some input. You've lost input from your external environment. So if you lost a sense of touch, or if you lost a sense of smell or a sense of taste, like some people lost a sense of taste and smell during COVID, or if you lost your sight or your hearing or both, right, that's really going to limit how you're going to receive information. And so even there, just kind of like at a very fundamental level, thinking about natural biological intelligence, we realize we have to be able to interact with our external environment, that we need to have input. I'm just looking to see if we're picking up noise. We have to have input from our external environment. And then that input informs us. And so again, when we first started learning about computers, we talked about the four functions of computers. And the four functions of computers are IPOS. And so we need input, we need processing, we need storage. Okay, I'll do that one there. Storage, we need storage, and we need output. And so we demonstrated the importance of those four functions of computers, or anything that is going to do some sort of take input and turn it and process it and turn it into output, right? Which is really what machines do, and it's also what we do. We receive input, we process it, and we turn it into output, either action or inaction, right? Or thoughts, right? We'll think things because of input. And so these four functions of a computer, IPOS, input, processing, output, and storage, right? Like a computer, we demonstrate that by me giving you a really basic mathematical problem. And I told you to add up a couple of numbers. And so I said, let's just choose some numbers here. Let's say 42 plus, I don't know, 777. I'm not even sure what that adds up to. Like we could do 777 plus 42. Let's do an easier one. So let's say 42 plus 7, right? What is 42 plus 7? And so in your mind, you probably already came up with the answer. It's 49. But to do that, you had to receive input. So I said, what's 42 plus 7? And so you heard that. Maybe you saw it on the screen. So you received it through two channels. And then you also had to store that information as it came into you. I'm going to change that word actually to data. You had to store that data as it came into you. You had to store 42. You had to store plus. You had to store 7. And so the data comes in through sight or through sound. You store it, so IPOS, you've used I and S, and then you process it. When I say what's that equal to, you say, oh, 42 plus 7 is 49, and you came up with that answer. And if we were here in person, you would say, well, that's 49. You'd produce output. So you did input, storage, processing, and output. So you did these four functions that we need to be intelligent, right? You did these four functions, and you're able to produce output. And so when we think about what is biological intelligence, it includes those four functions, right? It includes those four functions. And so artificial intelligence has to be able to interact with its environment, and it needs to take input and turn it, and process it and turn it into some sort of output. And it needs to be able to, start to emulate what we consider intelligence. And so in addition to those five senses, right, we also have consciousness. And so consciousness is like, we receive that input, and then at the processing level, really consciousness is found at this processing level, is like, how do we take that input and make different decisions? And so there's a story just to illustrate, and this is actually really philosophically profound, but there's a story to illustrate processing and how processing could have variability, could have variability. I was just trying to figure out how to say that. Processing could have variability. There could be variations in the output depending upon who's doing the processing. And that's actually, this diversity amongst humans is actually what makes nature very interesting, is because it's not uniform, it's not consistent, it's not always the same output. You ask me the same question on any different day at different times, you might get different answers. Of course, coming from one person, they're going to probably be pretty consistent. But if you ask different people the same question, you're going to get different responses. And that's really interesting because you've taken the same question and you've asked different people the same question and you got different output, you know, consistently. Like no two answers are, unless it's like as simple as what's 42 plus 7. But if it's like, you know, like what, you know, how do you feel? How do you feel? How do you feel about, you know, how do you feel about our, about, how do you feel, how do you feel about global warming, right? How do you feel about global warming? You're going to get different answers from everybody you ask, or whatever the question might be. How do you feel about mass media today? How do you feel about social media? How do you feel about the news channels? How do you feel about politics, right? You're going to get different answers. So it's really interesting. You get asked the same question and get different answers. And it might seem really obvious, but again, we're dealing with fundamental first principles here of what is intelligence. And so, you know, thinking about like, how does that all work? How does that all work? How do we have consciousness? How do we come up with different output? And then we could also even think about like, you know, is there a difference between, and you know, in neuropsychology, they'll make a distinction between the brain and the mind, right? And also in philosophy and also in different fields, they'll make a distinction between the brain and the mind. So the brain is the physical organ that you have in your skull, and then the mind is you know, can be beyond that. And so maybe the mind and the brain are the same thing, and that consciousness, I am, you know, I am. Descartes said, I think, therefore I am, right? Cogito ergo sum. But actually, you know, Descartes was incorrect, even though that philosophy is fundamental to Western thought. That is an incorrect statement. I think, therefore I am, because I am aware is the most fundamental thing, right? I am aware, therefore I am, because I could be aware and not be thinking. You know, like there's a way you could get to a state where you're aware and you're not thinking. And so this idea that like, you know, what is consciousness and the difference between the brain and the mind, and is consciousness just a biological process? Is it simply neural pathways and neurons firing and your prefrontal cortex and your amygdala and your dendrites, right? Is it just this biological process? Is that consciousness? Or is there something more going on? And when you actually look at all the research and the data, and some of it becomes quite metaphysical and somewhat esoteric, you start to see that consciousness isn't restrained to the brain or the mind, but it's more encompassing, and that there's all kinds of anecdotal and experiential evidence and scientific research studies that support this. So much so that William James was the founder. Who was William James, the psychologist? He was the founder of the field of psychologist, the field of psychology, and the first professor of psychology at Harvard University, and pioneering American psychologist and philosopher. And he was the first person to teach at, you know, Harvard University psychology. So the first person to teach a psychology class in America. And what is his quote about many different types of consciousness? It is a quote often quoted, or that is sometimes quoted, that is sometimes quoted in meditation circles, such as by Jack Kornfield. I don't know if that's going to bring it up. Our normal waking, yeah, here it is. Our normal waking consciousness, rational consciousness as we call it, is but one special type of consciousness, right? So the normal kind of consciousness that we're existing with, that you have right now, probably, you're probably not in some transcendental state. But that kind of consciousness is the normal consciousness. Whilst all about it, parted from it by the filmiest of screens, there lie potential forms of consciousness entirely different. We may go through life without suspecting their existence, but apply the requisite stimulus, and at a touch they are there in their completeness, definite types of mentality which probably somewhere have their field of application and adaptation. No account of the universe in its totality can be final, which leaves these other forms of consciousness quite disregarded, right? And so some of that consciousness might be like the collective consciousness, or the collective unconscious, which Carl Jung talked about. And Carl Jung was also another famous psychologist. And and Carl Jung actually had a near-death experience where his consciousness left his body. And so many people can report that state of consciousness, right? Like they had a near-death experience, their consciousness left their body, they were watching the doctors in the operating room operating on them, or trying to save them, and then they actually came back to life, but they were like hovering above, and they could come back and report everything that was going on. And so Carl Jung had a near-death experience, and he said he like just floated away and away and away. He's a million miles above the earth, and then a spirit came to him and said, "Your work on earth is not done. You need to go back." And so he went back to earth, and then he continued to stay in touch with the spirit called Philemon. And he said that Philemon taught him everything that he contributed of significance to the field of psychology. So that's a really profound statement from one of the leading figures in psychology, for him to say that everything he contributed to the field of psychology, he learned from a spirit called Philemon. And so this also jives with many of the world's belief systems, where they talk about the spirit realm, right? And different ways to reference the spirit realm. So we'll just look this up here quickly, and we'll say, what did Carl Jung say about Philemon and how everything Jung contributed to the field of psychology he learned from Philemon, and Philemon taught Jung the actuality of the soul. That's like, a quote. That's a direct kind of phrase from that quote. So we'll see here. So Carl Jung spoke about Philemon as a profound inner figure that emerged during his exploration of consciousness, of the unconscious, particularly during his confrontation with the unconscious recorded in the Red Book. Philemon was not just an imaginary character, but personification of Jung's deeper. Jung referred to him as a spirit. According to Jung, Philemon served as a guide teacher, shaping his understanding of his psyche, the soul, and psychological truths. Jung on Philemon, you can pause the video and read about this. Philemon represented a force that was not myself. He was a mysterious figure to me. At times he seemed like a living presence in the room. I conversed with him, and he said things which I had not consciously thought, for I observed clearly that it was he who spoke, not I. Everything that I accomplished in later life was already contained in what I experienced during the time of these inner images. I'm not sure where the quote is about the actuality of the soul. So if we go to Google, maybe Google will be able to provide this for us. We'll put Carl Jung, Philemon, actuality of the soul quote, and see if this comes up. Philemon and other figures of my fantasies brought home to me this crucial insight that there are things in the psyche which I do not produce, but which produce themselves and have their own life, right? And actuality of the soul. I'm not sure where that quote is. Philemon represent force which was not myself. But anyhow, there is now something called the Philemon Foundation. I think the quote is actually here. Who is Philemon? About the foundation. We'll just take a look at these. But this foundation, and what we're doing here is, you might be like, what are we talking about? We're exploring consciousness, and we're exploring intelligence, and we're exploring how it's not this cut and dry principle. And we're starting to edge up on something known as a black box. And the black box exists within us, and it also exists within AI, because we've created artificial intelligence which we don't understand how it operates, just like we don't understand how we operate. And it produces results which, who knows where they come from? Who knows where thoughts come from? And the same thing with AI, right? Like AI is like, where do these thoughts come from? So it's profoundly philosophical to think about artificial intelligence, because you have to think about intelligence and how do you recreate that? And we don't understand our intelligence. Like if you watch, it's like, where do my thoughts come from? Why do I have these thoughts? It's really interesting. So Philemon was simply a superior knowledge, and he taught me psychological objectivity and the actuality of the soul. He formulated and expressed everything which I had never thought, right? So here is, that quote I was looking for. Like this is an insanely crazy, profound quote from one of the most seminal figures in the field of psychology. For him to say that everything, that he was talking to this other entity, this other spirit. So another professor of psychology at Harvard, Dr. Richard Alpert, also said he communicated with a spirit, and actually two of them, and that these spirits guided him and advised him, and he would have conversations with them. So those are really profound things. And Dr. Richard Alpert was also known as Ram Dass, because he realized, Dr. Richard Alpert realized, he got to the top of the field of psychology. He was teaching psychology at Harvard, and he realized that he was just as crazy, and his colleagues were just as crazy. His colleagues teaching psychology, they were just as crazy as everybody else in the world. And he realized, like, what good is the field of psychology if, like, here we are, the experts in psychology, and we have just as much dysfunction and broken relationships and challenges in relationships, and we lack understanding and insight into consciousness just as much as everybody else. Like, like, what good is the field of psychology? So Dr. Richard Alpert became disillusioned, and he went to India, and he was searching for a deeper knowledge or a deeper truth about consciousness and what is the mind, because he was a seeker of knowledge and a seeker of wisdom, and he started to do a tremendous amount of meditation. Hey, what's going on? You have and so Richard Alpert decided to go and seek deeper truth about the mind and about consciousness and about existence by studying meditation. And he went to India, and he'd heard about people who had achieved higher states of consciousness through meditation. And so he wanted, and that they had some abilities which were inexplicable to, and out of the ordinary from normal, average, ordinary, everyday abilities. So Dr. Richard Alpert went to India, and he found a guru, and his guru was Neem Karoli Baba. And Neem Karoli Baba is one of these individuals who is known to have great spiritual power. And in India, they call this Leela. What is Leela in India? In India, what is the concept where it's playing with reality? I think I have to go here quick soon. I think it is Leela, or something like that, right? And so, yes, the concept you're referring to is Leela, and it's this philosophy that profound and multifaceted concept that can be translated as divine play or cosmic play, that you could play with reality. And so you can pause the video and you can read about this here and the different places it's talked about, and I guess there's more information there, so pause the video and read about that. But so pause the video here, you can read about it, and then pause the video here and you can read about it. There you go. So Neem Karoli Baba is known as one of these individuals who had extraordinary powers, and there's all kinds of different accounts in India, and then also Ram Dass came back and documented some of that. But Neem Karoli, Dr. Richard Alpert became a student of Neem Karoli Baba. Neem Karoli Baba told him he should take on the name Servant of God, which is Ram Dass. And then Dr. Richard Alpert came back to America and said, my name's now Ram Dass, I'm a servant of God, I'm going to teach you everything I learned in India. And he spent the 60s and the 70s and 80s and 90s and 2000s teaching everybody in America, going around and teaching them meditation, and then also talking about consciousness and extraordinary states of consciousness and these concepts of higher spirituality, and so that's really interesting. And there's like a podcast, the Ram Dass podcast, right? So all of his talks are still available today. Be Here Now Network, the Ram Dass podcast, and you could listen to his talks, and they're really really profound to listen to. And so all of that is just to underscore that when we're going to create artificial intelligence, we have to understand intelligence, and that isn't a cut and dry task, and it's really complex. And so that's the foundations of building artificial intelligence, is understanding intelligence. So that's what I guess we'll just leave it this week. That's the lecture here. We've talked for a little bit, and that's super interesting material. It's very philosophical, and definitely that's a good chunk of information to take in. And next week we'll come back and we'll revisit some of these terms, and also take a look at the new terms we haven't looked at yet. So we'll continue to define all this stuff. But that's a good foundation for this week of understanding artificial intelligence, we just have to really truly understand intelligence. And that's a really big question and isn't easy to answer. We do not have a definitive answer on what is consciousness, what is intelligence. But we'll talk about how we have proceeded and how humans, when I say we, I'm referring to humans, have proceeded to create an artificial intelligence and what that is and how we categorize it, the different terms. I hope you enjoyed that. I find all that super interesting. I was raised by social scientists, professor of sociology, who introduced me to all of this that we just talked about. And so really this is knowledge that has been passed down through many generations and through many teachers. And it's really great knowledge. It's really good to know about. All right, well, you have a great day. Keep doing what you're doing. Keep going to school. Degrees like your bachelor's degree, your master's degree, your doctorate degree, your MD, medical degree. Degrees get dollars, degrees open doors. So if you want to choose your pay, right now at this point in your life, you get to choose your paycheck. You get to choose it. So make sure you make a good choice. Choose something that's going to be demanded, where you're going to be needed, where you're going to be paid well. Because you're going to be working Monday through Friday, 8 to 5, if not a little bit more, every day of your life. And so choose something where you help people, but you also get paid well. Being a ER doctor, being a surgeon, being a fire chief, a fire captain, right? Like these would all be really good fields to think about. I've known people who've done all of that, and they've done really well. Being a lawyer can also be okay. Can be a little bit competitive. But anyhow, make good choices and have a great week.